Senator Waters.
Thanks very much, Acting Deputy President. And I rise to speak against the budget savings Omnibus Bill of 2016. And I think it's sadly very telling that the first substantive piece of legislation that this Senate has dealt with has been legislation to cut clean energy. Originally it was planned to cut kids' dental, it was planned to cut New Start, it's still going to cut carers' allowances, and it's going to cut education and student support. Now, of course, the next bill that the House has just dealt with that's coming to us shortly in the Senate is to give a tax cut to people on over $80,000. And we know shortly after that bill is one for $50 billion of tax cuts to big and multinational corporations. So how sad that we have a government that's happy to dole out largess to those that are already very wealthy and don't need the help, and is now forcing cuts on the most vulnerable and on our clean energy sector. I think it's a revolting statement of the priorities and the values of the present government. Now, we're told that we need some budget savings, and we Greens agree, and we've been putting many revenue-raising proposals to the government, to the opposition, to the public for the last few years, in fact. So we certainly don't oppose the need for budget repair, but what we do oppose is the continuation of the $15 billion spent on locking up men, women and children offshore in the last few years, on the $21 billion of subsidies to the fossil fuel sector that will be doled out over the forward estimates in the coming few years, and the continued largesse, as I said, going to tax cuts for big corporations when this government is seemingly blind to the impacts of these cuts on vulnerable people and on the clean energy sector. So the priorities are very clear. Perhaps it's not surprising, though, that we see massive cuts to clean energy from this government, because it's pretty clear that the backbench is in charge these days, and they're full of climate sceptics and climate deniers, people that don't understand that we are damaging our very way of life, and not only that, our economic profitability and our potential for job creation and growth. It's kind of ironic, really, that the government went to the election with a slogan of jobs and growth, and now this bill cuts money from an institution that is one of the main drivers of jobs and growth in a glowing global sector that Australia could really be going to town on. Instead, we see the government hampering jobs and growth with cuts to clean energy. But again, perhaps there's no surprise, given that we've seen from this government cutting the carbon price, installing a wind farm commissioner so that people who are very worried about the impacts of wind farms could have somewhere to vent their thankfully baseless concerns, never mind the health impacts of coal mines and other dirty energy. Government wasn't interested in looking at those. We've seen massive handouts to the polluters so that they can continue to pollute, as opposed to the revenue raising and the tax that they used to have to pay on the pollution that they created. We've seen cuts to the renewable energy target by this government. And of course the tragedy there is those cuts were fully supported by the opposition. So perhaps we shouldn't be surprised that we now see again a bipartisan approach to cutting clean energy. The Australian Renewable Energy Agency, or ARENA as it's known, will now, as a result of the deal done between these two big parties, have $500 million cut out of its budget. And those cuts have been front-ended. The vast majority of them are in the first 3 years, so they're on the books, and ARENA will feel those cuts immediately and for the coming few years. Now, what an absolute tragedy that, yes, we have a terrible government with an awful agenda, but we had the chance here, we had the numbers on the crossbench to block those cuts entirely. But instead of doing that, the Labor opposition have reached an agreement to cut $500 million out of ARENA. And now they have the audacity to want praise for that. They're going around claiming that they've saved ARENA. Well, sorry, you had the chance to actually not pass any of those cuts. The government wanted to cut $1.3 billion. You could have stood with the Greens and the crossbench, and there were enough of us, we all know that, to have stopped all of that $1.3 billion in cut from clean energy. So it's an absolute tragedy that we've had the two big parties agree to cut $500 million when Labor needn't have made that agreement. There are other revenue-raising measures. They've found some already, and I'm pleased they've taken a stand and they've said they'll block the cuts to kids' dental and they'll block some of the cuts to New Start and other social support. I welcome that and praise them for that. Why didn't they find those same alternative revenue measures and stand up for clean energy rather than wreaking a $500 million cut down on ARENA? Now, people who are listening might not know what ARENA does, but it's a fantastic organisation that was set up to support with grant funding those very early stage renewable energy innovation projects. Really exciting things like printing of solar panels onto, say, corrugated iron roofs. Things like speeding up the efficiency and the availability and the affordability of batteries, so that instead of expensive pressure on our grid with maintenance required for old infrastructure, we can actually look at these new storage methods, which not only solves many of the problems of the grid but empowers households to manage their own energy demand. It's that sort of really exciting cutting-edge technology that this institution has been investing in. And again, you want jobs and growth? Well, clean energy is the sector that globally is taking off, and some of those inventions, and many of them in the renewable energy sector, are homegrown. They will now not have the ability to proceed because that organisation now has $500 million less. There is $500 million now not going into that innovation to create jobs in clean energy to help us tackle climate change and save the reef. I think it's truly outrageous. So the irony is, of course, in cutting funding from ARENA, how on earth are we going to meet our renewable energy target? How on earth are we going to meet our Paris emissions reductions targets? Many of the experts agree, and certainly the scientists agree, that those Paris targets are too weak as it is, and that the renewable energy target is too small as it is. We're on track to overshoot it. Sadly, these guys ganged up and cut it. But how are we going to meet either of those targets when we don't have genuine investment in clean energy and innovation? And of course, we're in a climate emergency, folks. Of course we need to repair the budget, but let's get things in perspective. There are many ways that we could repair the budget. There are not so many ways that we can help that transition from dirty fuels to clean fuels in a way that safeguards our way of life and our planet and also creates jobs. There are no downsides with clean energy, except if you're a fossil fuel company, of course. And that brings me to the sad revelation that in the last 3 years there's been $3.7 million of donations made to the Labor, the Liberal and the National parties by the fossil fuel sector. So of course they're very powerful political influences, and that money talks. It's no wonder that they get their $21 billion of cheap fuel and accelerated depreciation over the forward estimates, and yet we're told that we need to make budget savings. Of course they don't want to touch that $21 billion because the donations might dry up. What a sorry situation. Another reason why we're pushing to reform donations and end corporate donations completely, and of course cap donations from individuals as well, and clean up our system. One further point that I'd like to make: we were very distressed this week when, after the Labor Party caved in and agreed to cut $500 million out of clean energy, in the other place it was let slip that actually that $800 million that had been apparently saved from ARENA was going to be cut out of other clean energy sources. It was called either the Clean Energy Finance Corporation or the Clean Energy Innovation Fund. The government was very slippery in using those terms interchangeably, even though they're different pots of money. The government is implying that, in fact, there's not been any savings at all and that clean energy will still be short a total of $1.3 billion. Now, either they pulled the wool over Labor's eyes to placate their own climate sceptic backbench, or Labor was happy with that arrangement. Now, we don't know, and I'll be asking questions in the committee stage to try and get to the bottom of this. We tried to do that in the House and the minister was not very responsive, is the nicest way of describing the responses that our member for Melbourne, Adam Bant, got. So what we need to discover tonight is that $1.3 billion still being cut out of clean energy, some of it from ARENA and now others, some of it from those other pots, or is the government simply, did they make a huge stuff up, or have they been misleading the House? We'll find out tonight. And what I'd also be asking in the committee stage is what projects are going to be jeopardised by the loss of that $500 million. We've just seen a fantastic large-scale solar grant fund by ARENA, which has led to many projects right around the country, particularly in regional areas, huge job creation and great renewable energy input into the grid. That sort of exciting job creation is what we need, that tackles climate change at the same time. I'm worried about what ARENA now can't do because they're $500 million poorer. And I hope that we'll get some answers out of the government as to what the implications of this cut will be, and I hope Labor sought to ask those questions when it agreed to cut that amount of money. So I'll foreshadow tonight that at the second reading stage I'll be moving to condemn the government and the opposition for cutting $500 million out of clean energy funding at this point in history, when the climate emergency is real, when the rest of the world is already making the transition to clean energy and benefiting from that not only environmentally but economically. I will be moving to condemn the actions of both of the big parties in this place, who are so hostage to those fossil fuel donors that they are clearly making terrible decisions when we have alternative revenue-raising measures that could repair the budget without buggering up the planet.
Thank you.